Hello, it is me, Noah Wisman, yet again with another video which I'm making as part of the journey that I'm undergoing through graduate school, through my graduate program. Another video documenting my thought process and the development of that thought process. Um, and this video in particular is going to be a little bit more historical than the last video I made, which was about the thinking that I'm doing presently and currently. Um, this is going to be a little bit more of a walk through memory lane, and I'm going to be talking about the way that I have interacted with the task of reading and interpreting and learning from professional research papers, professional research. This is, of course, a major part of being a researcher and of being a professor in any capacity, is interacting with the body of research that's relevant to you, taking it in, and making it your own. And I wanted to make this video sort of highlighting my process because I think that the way that I interact with research is in contrast to um, maybe the broader overall trend in the way that people interact with professional research in the current landscape. Um, I can't speak for everybody who's not myself, but I certainly know that there has been a trend, there is a trend, there's an ongoing trend, which has been going on for many decades, even, and certainly in recent times, towards reading a lot of papers, a lot of publications, a lot of research articles relatively quickly. There's been an overall tendency towards let me look at a big mass of research and kind of wade through it in order to get to the points that I want to make. And this approach has proliferated because there is more and more research that's being published. The onus to be an expert in your field, to know all the relevant literature, has become harder and harder to live up to, and so people have tended to try to streamline and intake research, or have tried to streamline that process. And again, this concept of skimming many articles. I take a general approach of reading less research papers more deeply, rather than more research papers more quickly or more shallowly. And I wanted to kind of go over how I do this and why I do this here. I do, of course, have to, because of that onus, sometimes just read stuff and get through it. But I really prefer not to. I prefer to sit with articles and consider them more so than just getting in their basic points. And that's what I'll be highlighting here. Okay, so, you know, why do I do this? Well, there's two main reasons. The first is that, in educational psychology, it's been found that, you know, active and interactive learning which involves manipulation and further considerations, tends to lead to more long-term learning than learning which is more passive. And I feel that this way of interacting with research leads to me developing deeper understandings. And the second reason that I like to interact with research this way is because to me it's more fun to do research this way, to read research this way. I don't want um, reading research to become a chore that I have to complete. You know, I I fell in love with the process of science, scientific method, scientific research, because I liked to read about these ideas and think about them and extrapolate on them. And I would like to continue to have that kind of relationship to the greatest extent possible with professional research. A lot of my peers in the program have talked about being sort of strung out from reading research articles and just looking at research articles and seeing way too many research articles. And I'm looking to, as much as possible, avoid that feeling in myself and keep the fire lit, keep the passion going. And the way that I read research and take notes on research looks to kind of maintain that relationship with professional research to the greatest extent possible. Of course, it's not easy. Okay, um, with that in mind, I wanted to showcase some of the notes that I take and the way that I organize them, um, and the way that that has evolved over time. So what you're looking at here is just my Google Drive, which I think is reasonably well organized. You can see here I have a tab for things that are academic. Over here in the general drive, there's some stuff that's more personal, so I won't be displaying that. But everything here are notes that I have about things that I've read and learned about. Um, you can see that I have different categories here, different subfolders within academic, and then a couple of papers out here in the main area. We'll be seeing this document later where I track all of the research that I've done, or all the research I've taken notes on, as well as research that I've done, learning that I've done that is not the reading of professionally peer-reviewed, published research articles, of which there's quite a bit of that as well. But today we'll be focusing on this stuff. And so basically, pretty much every research paper that I read, I take notes on. Sometimes there'll be a research paper that I just read. I don't take notes in association with that paper, but that's the exception. The rule is that I do take notes. I just create a Google Doc um, with the title, that lets me remember what that paper was about, and I add it to the research notes document. And here we are in here. Sorry, not the research notes document, the research notes folder. And here it is. You can see I have, again, some general notes here. This is about neuroscience, which I'm trying to put those thoughts together. And you can see that I've separated these research notes into some subcategories. Today, of course, we're looking at the professionally published psychology papers. I do read some stuff about humanities, and here's the stuff that is not peer-reviewed papers. But we'll go into the psychology papers for now. And here it is. Here are the notes that I've taken on all of the professionally published research I've read. And I would say that I started doing this in undergraduate, probably around the senior year, maybe a little bit before that. And I wish that I had started doing this sooner, because there was a good amount of research and research papers that I read before this that I did not catalog, I didn't document, and now I don't know where to find them. And I remember them, but I can't go back to reference them. I can't go back to reference my notes on them. So I started in senior year or so undergraduate, and I wish I'd started sooner. But here you can see I have some notes that are out here that I have yet to put into the subfolders, and each one of these documents are my notes on a research article that I read. You can see there's maybe about 20 out here. And then the biggest, most filled up folder of these four, I have a little bit of animal behavior research, child developmental research, just other research that can be classified, but the one that's the most full is education. Educational psychology research, because that is my main discipline. And in this folder, I think, at last count, there's over 100 just documents in here, each of which has the notes on papers that I've read. There are some notes in here that are about books that I've read as well, that were professionally written. But mostly these are notes on individual research papers. Um, what I'll do now is I'll sort by um, I have sorted by last modified by me. So what you're seeing right now is these were the first of the documents that I made. And as we scroll down, you'll see more and more recent documents. There's a few exceptions where I edited one that I made a while ago, but for the most part, this is a kind of chronological order of when I made the document, when I read the paper, and uh, to today, from sort of senior year till today. You can see that um, there's a big variety of papers in here. One of the things that I do to keep my relationship with reading research fresh and enjoyable is I try to look around and read from different sources and different lines of research. I do have a bit of a jack of all trades within me. This is another way in which I cut a little bit against the grain of what it means to be a professional research in the modern day, to specialize. I like to know at least a little bit about everything, and then pick a few things to learn more about. So you'll see that there's a really big variety here. We have papers about framing, about museums, science museums, um, cognitive load theory, testing effect, implicit theories of intelligence, just a lot of different areas. There's some neuroscience in here. Um, there's some social psychology type papers as well. There's just a really big um, variety. And I had a reason to read all of these papers when I read them. I always read research papers for some reason. That might just be because I think that their premise is interesting, or I have some kind of task that I want to complete and I'd like it to be based in professional research, and so on like this. But I always have a reason for things that I read, for things that I read, for reading the things that I read, that is. So here it is. These are, again, this is all the stuff I've read. You can see that I did have a little era here where I was really interested in the way that seats are arranged in classrooms, and I read a good like 6 papers or so about that. It's an interesting line of research. And just so on and so on. Lots of different papers from lots of different perspectives. Okay. So here's the overview. Again, lots of notes being taken. And, this has been researched by educational psychologists. Because I take these notes, I can really remember pretty well almost all the papers that we're seeing in here. I remember reading them. I remember what they said. I remember what I liked and didn't like about them. Can pick any one of them at random, give or take. Like this was a note-taking review. I think this was by Kurwara, I want to say the name was, and it was looking at different ways of taking notes in class and which ways helped and which ways didn't help. It does seem to matter a lot what kinds of notes you take in terms of the effect that it has on your learning. It's possible to take notes that don't help you very much at all, and that may even harm you in comparison to just listen to lecture. You need to take notes that are summative and which introduce your own ideas. They also talked about how you can try to train people to take better notes. That was what this paper covered. And so on like that. Again, I can do this for a lot of the older ones as well. Some of these notes were written, 3 years ago or 4 years ago. But I can tell you all about this paper right here. This is a classic paper, the difference between how experts and novices categorize physics problems. This paper is very influential, by Chai and Glasser, I believe. where they found that novices tended to organize physics problems based on surface level features, and experts tended to organize physics problems based on their underlying structures. And again, I can do this with pretty much all of these papers, which I think is a good sign in terms of this approach working pretty well. And indeed, I know I read other papers before I started doing this, and I just don't remember them as well. Okay, so that's the overview, and I will say that my rate of doing this has definitely dropped since I started graduate school, and that's even including the papers that I read as part of the graduate school program, which I do take notes for all of those papers as well. But even including those, I'm reading less research than I was before I started graduate school, when I had no reason to read research, and that's because I've adopted a lot of other responsibilities. But I'm sure I'll get back into it if and as I get into my literature review, which is coming right up. I'll probably make a video about that as well. Okay, so what I have up here is just a selection of some of the notes that I've taken that I thought showed the sort of progression pretty well. One of the earlier papers that I read right here as part of this process was 9 Ways to Reduce Cognitive Load. This is a classic paper from Mayer and Moreno from the early 2000s. It's been cited some 10,000 times or what have you, more than that for sure. Every one of these notes I have the authors and the year of publication and the title. I save the more full citation information separately. Just on these, I just like to highlight this because it's what's most important to me. And when I first started taking notes, the notes I would take were very summative. They were about sort of summarizing what the article was about. One of the early things I did that I like, that I still do now, is I talked about how the article unfolded. I wouldn't just take notes about the content of the article or the findings of the article, but notes about how it was presenting the information that it contained. So you can see here I write, paper opens with a general explanation of cognitive load theory. It's like kind of meta information. Then here I sort of summarize what the paper is saying, summarize, and then again, this is something I did really early on, which I've continued to do now, which is I insert my own thoughts into the process. And one of the other things we'll see as we go through this history is that I've done more and more of this kind of note-taking and less of this kind, less of the summary kind. You can see I say, in general, I buy this theory with caveats. Again, early on, I was a critical reader of papers. Complicated relationship between difficulty and learning. Capacities are often parallel reinforcing underestimated. Again, just inserting my own thoughts into the note-taking process, not just restating what the paper was saying. Again, here's what the paper is doing, the way the argument's being structured. These kinds of notes both help you remember the content. Studies have learn about the structure of a research paper and what makes it good and what makes it not so good. Okay. More summaries. And here at the bottom I kind of put it all together for myself. Really, I think the whole paper kind of boils down to make clear presentations, not confusing ones. And, I think maybe that is true. It's a little bit reductive. But I do, again, right from the beginning, I was a little bit casual with a lot of the notes that I was taking. And that, again, has become even more pronounced as time has gone on. Okay. Take these suggestions with a grain of salt. Better to have in mind than not have in mind. And indeed, I mentioned before that I always have a reason to read the research that I'm reading, and this was because I was needing to make presentations for my classes and also my job, and I wanted to make sure those presentations were good. So this was a paper that I read to inform the way I make presentations. Okay. Here we have another paper I read, another pretty widely cited paper. This was a little bit further down the road. Um, One of the things that I started doing as I continued to take notes is opening every one of them with a statement about the, the purpose of the paper, a kind of one line about this is why this paper exists and what it's trying to do. And this is an early example of that, describes and provides evidence of the testing effect, which is that testing yourself on material as review is more effective than going over it again for long-term retention. I talk about study here. One thing I'll do is I will cut and paste or copy and paste graphs from the original study if I think they're particularly illustrative. And you can see here that these notes are pretty short, very short in fact. I did feel like when I was reading this paper it wasn't too hard for me to understand. But one of the things you're going to see again as we go on is that these notes are going to get more elaborative and there's going to be more to them, although you'll have to take my word for it that it takes me about the same amount of time to take these notes, even though I'm writing more of them now, writing more than I was in the past. Okay. Then here is another pretty classic paper. A lot of the early papers I read were classics that have been cited very frequently and that have been very influential. This is Steele and Aronson, 1995, Stereotype Threat and Intellectual Test Performance of African Americans. Again, this is one of these kinds of statements. This paper is covering a topic that I'm aware of in detail, specifically focusing on when the stereotype is negative. This was something that I had known about before, but I wanted to go back and read the classic paper that inspired the rest of the line of research. Again, sort of cover, paper begins with, again, this is what the paper is doing. Summarizing some of the key groups, adding my own opinions in as well. And this is here. You can see I'm incorporating a little bit more casualness into the notes. This kind of quotation, self-quotation kind of thing. More summaries. I did break up the different studies. Again, a little bit more of that casual note-taking. I'm here defining stereotype threat as an offhand statement rather than in a formal way. This test will be hard and reflect your verbal intellectual abilities. Here's an example of what would give the stereotype threat. These are all my own terms. Copy paste the graphs. Again, more elaborative than it was for testing effect and even for the cognitive load. And that is a trend that continued. I even remember where I was when I read this paper. I was sitting in the cafeteria of Queensborough Community College. I remember that. Okay. And again, one of the major innovations that I made around this time is I've added this thoughts section where I just add my own thoughts, independent of the progression of the paper. And this is where things get really, really loose. And I've continued to do this up till today. I write very casually in these sections. You can see I have an all captions things here. It's like you're performing in front of an audience who's judging you. The audience of society. So I love doing those kinds of things. Makes it fun for me. Okay. Critiques of the paper. Things I liked, things that I didn't like, things that it relates to that I know about. All of that stuff goes down here. And of course I can also include that stuff in the main body as well if I feel like it fits there better. But I have a dedicated section for my own thoughts as well. Okay. Self-regulated learning overview. This is a topic that I've gotten into a little more deeply recently. This is one of the earlier papers I read about it. Summarizing. Again, this right here is probably one of the early great examples of writing very specifically what the intention of this paper is. and what its key points are. Also, even the relevance that it has to me. This will serve as my formal introduction to the concept. This is like one of the first papers I read that was specifically about this subject, self-regulated learning. I had read about the theoretical construct, Bandura's social cognitive theory that self-regulated learning emerges from, but this was the first self-regulated learning paper. You'll note, because this was the first self-regulated learning paper I was reading, I do a lot more summarizing. Once I have read some articles in a vein, and I know the basic points that people like to make sort of by heart, I'll do less summarizing and more of my own ideas. That's the transition that occurs. More criticisms. So a lot of summarizing here. Summarizing. Again, my own thoughts down here as well. Again, here you can see that I remembered the place that this paper has in my own personal history of learning, that I had read about self-regulation, self-efficacy, but this was my first introduction to this subject. Ideas are ideating. Okay. It's funny looking back on this because I've read a lot more about this subject now, and I like a lot of what I was saying even back here. It's good stuff. Okay. Here's I've read, this is another classic kind of paper, Bargan, Chartrand, The Unbearable Automaticity of Being. This is a very claim then evidence type article running through a litany of topics. They have a claim about automaticity and then string evidence together to support that claim. What about this? This supports the claim. What about this? This supports our claim. And again, I can remember this, and the notes are really helpful as well. A lot of this business, a lot of summarizing. I guess this is kind of an introduction to this subject. Summarizing. Here's my thought section. And again, getting as time goes on, I'm getting looser and looser, especially in these thought sections. These cats be having a little too much fun writing this article. Some actually adjust glasses energy. I love it. Although it does lose steam in the middle of the late portion, just be a regular research paper for a while until conclusion. And I really remember this distinctly in terms of the way the article is written. They start off making some really incendiary comments about our apparent interaction with the world and ourselves and what it really is. I really like that section. And then it kind of gets into being a more normal research paper until it wraps up and it starts making those kinds of incendiary comments again. Very interesting formatting that this paper had. And a lot of thoughts I had about this one as well. More and more of the thoughts. This paper falls off a bit. It falls into the trap of making absolute statements based on like a 65-35 split of behavioral evidence, a social sciences classic. What happened with those 35% of people? Yeah, good point, me. Okay. Becoming a Bartender, this is one I read relatively recently. I read it maybe like 2 months ago now or something like that. Again, another classic. I have read papers that aren't classics, and those notes tend to be a little more critical and about the limitations of the study. But this one is a classic. This, I think, is a good representation of the way I currently take notes. It has gotten a little bit shorter than maybe this era, but it's still on longer sides usually. Schoolified, again, bring some casualness into them. Important for getting tips, haha, okay. And then a nice extended thought section as well. Probably. I like that a lot. This is a good paper. Okay. So that's just a little sample of the notes that I take, the kind of notes that I take. It is time consuming to do this, and I've been keeping up with the self-standard of doing this for like every paper that I read, but I know I'm not going to be able to do that going forward. but I'm going to do it at the very least for a similar rate of papers that I've been doing now, and I'll include more papers that I'm not doing this for as well. But I really enjoy doing this. Okay. And this is the Google Doc I highlighted earlier, where I keep information about all the papers that I've read. I've got categories of the different subject matters that they cover. I'm really not happy about a lot of these categories. I probably have to rework the way these are organized, but here they are. I usually just have the name and the title of the paper, and sometimes I might have the full citation. I've been doing the full citation more frequently recently, but I'm more reliable just to keep the full citation on Zotero. Yes, I do use Zotero. Um, Zotero is very helpful in terms of just getting all of this kind of information together automatically without having to type it all in. But I always like to go out of my way to remember the authors and the basic title of the paper on my own. I am currently starting to pay more attention to what journals they are published in, especially for the more modern stuff that I've read. But this is the overall document. You may notice that I have these like highlights, green, yellow, and no highlight on the titles of the papers, and these highlights basically represent how likely I would be to recommend this paper for someone else to read who wanted to learn about educational psychology. The likelihood I would include them in a class about educational psychology. They're kind of a note on how much I thought I got out of the paper, how relevant I thought it was. And I'd like to have those little bits of highlighting as well. Yeah, like see this category, I don't like this category. I don't like this category as it's used in professional research either, and I don't like the way that I have it. But yeah, you see a lot of different subjects again. Okay. Again, the reason why I have always generally only cited, the name of the author, year publication, main title is because to me that's the most important information about a research paper. Again, that might be cutting a little bit against the grain here. I like to be able to see who wrote a certain paper, to try to understand the lines of research that have occurred, when it was published, in the same vein, trying to understand where it fits into the grand history of scientific research. And I like to have the title which they chose to use, because it helps me learn about keywords and style and presentation, things like that. Those things I think are very interesting. But I'm increasingly paying a little more attention to some of the other metadata that exists on all these publications. Okay, so again, that's pretty much the full business. I do need to update some of these things with the papers I've been reading for my classes in graduate school. I'll probably do that over summer break. And yeah, that's my notes, that's my note-taking process, that's my reasoning behind it, and I'm going to try to continue to do this, although I know that I probably won't be able to keep pace for everything. But, I guess I will mention briefly at the end of the video, the AI is coming into professional research. It's here. It's here to stay most likely, and to me, it represents even more of a drive towards this summation and the skimming and the just give me the key pointification of the interaction between professional research and the body of literature. And it's something that I try to run against the grain in that way, because I enjoy that more and I feel like I get more out of it. Okay, that's the video, and see you in the next one.